Hello, I'm Scott Alsop, and in this video we're going to look at how to answer source questions that ask about the reliability, value and usefulness of sources. You are guaranteed to see a question of this type on your exam paper, so it makes a lot of sense to be prepared for it. In these types of questions, the examiner wants to see that you can recognise that some sources have more value to historians than others, some are more reliable than others, and some are more useful than others. These are all subtly different issues, but the way that you approach the question is broadly the same, which is why I'm looking at them together. A question might be something along the lines of, what is the value of source A for an historian trying to find out about a certain thing? Or it might be, how useful is source B for someone studying whatever it might be? Alternatively, it might say, how reliable is source C regarding something? The first thing to do with these questions, once you've had a good look at the source and made sure that you understand what it's telling you, for more information on that, then see my comprehension of sources questions, well then you need to consider the reliability. To do this, you need to pay very close attention to who created the source, when it was created and why it was created. This requires you to consider the provenance of the source. That's the bit in italics at the bottom, because that gives you a lot of this information for free. You then need to cross-reference this background to your own knowledge and then put it into the historical context. It's important to go into the exam knowing that sources can never be completely reliable or unreliable, but they can be more or less reliable. Every source has positive and negative aspects, and you need to consider these in your answer. If the source, for example, comes from an historian, you need to think about whether they might have been personally involved, or if they're physically detached from the event or the people that are being spoken about. If the source comes from an individual who was involved in the event and then lived through it, you should consider whether they might have had a negative or a positive experience of it and how that could affect their interpretation in the source. Thirdly, was the source created at the time of the event, or was it done later, after it had finished? What's their motive in creating it? Why did they bother to spend the time to write or draw it? And finally, what is or was the position or role of that person within that event? Now, in terms of contemporary sources, these are the ones that were created at the time. Newspapers are most commonly used. The key questions still apply, however. You need to think about the country of origin and any possibility of national attitudes that might have shaped the point of view that they're writing from. Think also about the motivation of the writer or the publisher. Is it an accurate and objective report, or is it in fact designed to persuade people towards a particular point of view? Is the source actually an eyewitness account of the event, or is it a commentary of something pieced together from a series of eyewitnesses? Furthermore, is the report subject to any form of censorship, and so purposefully not give a full account? Considering all of these issues can help you to judge how reliable a source is. Remember that there will be some positive aspects, but also some negative. It's no good just saying the source is biased without explaining what the bias is. Whose side is the person on, and why is it actually a problem? Because even a source that is biased will be able to give some information that is actually based on fact. The issue of usefulness requires you to consider useful to whom and for what. Just because a source isn't entirely reliable, it doesn't mean that it can't then be useful or of value to a historian or to someone else then going on and studying the topic later. Now, let me illustrate with an example. A source that might be written by a male politician that gives a negative view of women having the right to vote may be biased. But despite this, it could still be very useful to reveal male attitudes towards women and the right to vote in the early 20th century. What lies at the heart of usefulness and value questions is a consideration of what the source is being used for. This is why you need to pay very close attention to the question, since this gives you a clear focus in the terms in which you're judging usefulness. Now, it may help to think of your response in terms of, oh yes, it's that again, a comparative table. Now, on one side, what are the values of this source to an historian trying to answer the question set? And on the other side, what are the problems with using this source to answer that question? Once you've identified and discussed points on both sides of the argument, you then need to make a final judgment. This means reaching a firm conclusion on how useful or valuable you think that source is. Now, this is a sliding scale. Where does the source actually fit? Is it a long way towards the useful side, or is it more on the not useful? Is it slightly to one side, or reasonably, or quite? These are the kinds of words that you should be using to judge how useful, valuable, or reliable a source actually is. Now, let's finish with a recap of the key things that we've looked at. Firstly, you need to use both the content and the provenance of the source to reach a judgment on reliability. Secondly, a source is never completely useful or completely useless. What you interpret as an unreliable source may in fact still be useful for revealing a certain point of view. Thirdly, usefulness and value of sources can only be judged in terms of the question that they're being used to answer. Fourth, make sure that your answer is relevant by regularly referring back to the question to ensure that you keep yourself on track. And finally, planning what you're going to say in your answer is very important. Nevertheless, don't spend all your time writing a plan. You must ensure that you actually leave time to write your answer. It's very likely that you'll be asked to compare the usefulness or value of sources and then need to decide which source is more useful. In this case, you need to go through the process that I've outlined for each individual source in order to reach a judgment or conclusion on which you then think is the most useful. For advice on how to approach other types of source analysis question, then you can check out my other videos by clicking these links.